Today we are going to be talking about something that a lot of you have probably seen comments about if you are following the space, but it is the police state that is China. A lot of people will say that China is a police state and oh, it's this terrible communist government that's out to get its people, and all kinds of crazy things that people will say. So I'm going to walk around a little bit to see if we can find this supposed police state and talk a little bit about my experience living here for the past 12 years and how I see it compared to my home country, which is the United States, and kind of give an idea or a feel based on my many years living in the States and my many years living here in China, to talk about which one I think is more of a police state, or also just talk about the difference of the police states, because there is opinion might not be what everybody wants to hear, but I would say both countries are police states. So we'll get into that in this video. So I've decided to come down to, this is the backside of the Forbidden City, and this is where I know the most police concentration there is that I've ever seen is down here in these very historic sites. So we're gonna walk along here and try and see if we can find the police officers to show you how bad it is. Obviously, I'm joking, but yeah, in China, a lot of people say that there's police on every corner, and if you go to certain areas, you will find that. But what I've found is that the police aren't any more invasive than in my home country, and as a matter of fact, I've only ever had one real run-in with the police. Here we go, all the police fans. But I've only had one encounter with the police that wasn't like a normal encounter where, like, if I'm registering with the police or I'm going to the visa office and there's, like, you know, government officials. It's actually a clear day. If you look in the back there, you can see the Zoom Tower. And then, of course, backside of the Forbidden City here. Really beautiful. I live down in this area. That's why I'm always walking down here. It's not like I'm coming down here. So the one encounter that I had was actually at a protest, and so this was a protest, and I went out to get photos of that protest here in China because I thought it was really interesting, because as many of you know, protesting is not really allowed in China. This is one of the things that, you know, the haters always point out. They say, oh, you don't have freedom of expression, you don't have freedom of speech, you don't have the ability to protest against the government. So this protest that I went out to was actually in Shenyang when I was living up north, and that protest was an anti-Japanese protest, which was allowed by the government and actually encouraged by the government, which was actually really interesting. So I went out there, and I had a good feeling that I was going to end up being questioned, because I was a foreigner and I was at this protest, and they were, you know, I was taking pictures and videos, so I assumed that the police would stop me. I even took my passport, because you're supposed to have your passport on you at all times when you're here, like your ID, which is your passport for a foreigner. That's your legal ID, is your passport, and you're supposed to carry it with you at all times, but nobody does. I don't know any foreigner that actually carries their passport on them all the time, but this time, because I was going to this protest, wow, it's so pretty here. Because I was going to this protest, I knew there was a good chance that I'd be questioned, so I took my passport with me. And I was. A plain clothes undercover cop, police officer, investigator, whatever he was, stopped me and said, hey, who are you? And I said, I'm nobody. I'm not a journalist. He's like, are you a journalist? I'm like, no, I'm not a journalist. I was working at a university at the time, so I was just teaching. I was like, oh, I'm just a teacher. And took my ID, ran it through the system, asked me a few more questions, like why was I out there filming this protest, and I was like, oh, I thought it'd be interesting. And he's like, oh, okay. He's like, are you going to sell these photos? Like, you know, do you have any connections to the media? And at that time, I had no connections to the media because I hadn't been working in the media. I was working for a university. And he let me go, no problems. He checked my ID, and he said, all right, fine, whatever, go on. And I continued following the protest for a couple more hours, and then I got bored with it because, you know, I mean, it's a protest. And it was also kind of weird because it was like an anti-Japanese protest, and it was like state allowed. It was like almost promoted. I think the university kids had the day off, That has literally been the only time I've had any issue with the police in China. The only other times that I've had even somewhat of an encounter would have been with the filming. So I go out and film like now, and some of the Baoan, which aren't actually police, they're the security guards, will sometimes come up and say, hey, you can't film here. Which, again, if that's the case, I say, oh, sorry, I didn't know, and I just move on. I don't try and fight them on it, because what's the point? So that's been my only encounter here. As for in the United States, I don't know, I mean, you get stopped when you're driving, you know, if you're speeding a little bit, and then it's always a hassle and a bit of a hesitation in the United States. And so one of the reasons like it's always kind of like this awkwardness in the United States is because you never know what's going to happen. And this is probably one of the biggest issues in the United States, is because the police are armed and because the citizens are armed. There's more guns in the United States than there are citizens. Every single stop, every single encounter, like it's life-threatening to them, right? So there is no mediation of a situation. They never come up and just say, hey, what's going on? How can we help? Or what's the problem? It's always, we have to come in with overwhelming force and control the situation, because anybody could have a weapon, anybody could have a gun, essentially. And so you don't take the risk. You come in with overwhelming force, you arrest everybody, you put everybody in handcuffs, and you sort it out later. It's kind of, you know, shoot first and ask questions later, which is actually one of those things that are, I think, oftentimes escalates the situation. This is why you have so many run-ins and incidences with the police. Sorry, I gotta get a shot of that. Look at that. That's so cool. As my head gets in the way. That's so cool. Yeah, but a lot of these instances that you have in the United States is because the police escalate it. There's no de-escalating of the situation, because they say, look, we have to take control and have a lot of control of this situation right away in order to protect ourselves. Because if everybody has guns, that's the great equalizer, so to say. A kid can kill an adult because they have a gun, and that happens quite frequently. And so in the United States, whenever I ended up in this situation, oh, I gotta show you this. Sorry. They come out here and get their wedding photos. So this is a great shot, as you can see behind me. And so lots of people will come out here and get their wedding photos done. I like the ones in the traditional clothing down there on the far end in the red. A lot of people here in their wedding dresses. Wow. I love it. I mean, that is a great shot with that photo. So that's why they come out here. Really cool. So let's keep going, because there's more police right here. My goodness, this police state, it's out of control. You know, wedding photos over there. I mean, that's probably staged, right? That's what the comments will say. It's staged to make it look normal. No, but so in the United States, whenever I've had issues and run-ins with the police, it's always been with overwhelming force. The police come in and control the situation, and that is how it's like. That's how it's done. Sorry, lots going on today. It's a beautiful day too. Sorry, I'm so distracted with this video because it's kind of all over the place and there's too much going on. I just want to enjoy Beijing and walk around and see everything today because it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, but in the United States, whenever I'd stop, even if it was just like a routine, you know, going over the speed limit, or, you know, turned on a red light when I wasn't supposed to, like, you know, petty stuff that's not even a big deal. You get pulled over and then you feel threatened. Like, you feel extremely nervous because you don't know how the encounter is going to go. And that's one of the biggest differences here, is I've never felt threatened by the police here. Ever. Even in that situation that I was describing where I knew I was probably going to have a run-in with the police, I didn't feel, oh, there goes another police car. Oh my God, they're everywhere. But I didn't feel threatened in that situation because the police here don't have guns and the citizens here don't have guns. There's only 2 or 3 instances where the regular police will have like actual guns. And down there near the Forbidden City, there is armed guards, but that's the military. It's a different police unit. It's not the normal, like, police. And the only other time I've seen guns is on the money trucks. So if you're at a bank and they're dropping money off, or picking money up from the bank, they'll have an armed guard with the truck. But because of that dynamic, nobody here in China is specifically afraid of the police. And I don't want to say nobody, because that's too big of a generalization, and I'll get into some of the more specifics in a second. But many people aren't afraid, and a lot of times you'll hear, like, people say that if you're lost or if you need help, try to find a police officer, because they will help you. They'll be the most trustworthy people to engage with, which I have found to be true myself. Whenever I'm really lost in a city, especially if I'm traveling, I'll approach a police officer first, because their job is to help. If you approach people on the streets, they'll often give you bad information because they don't want to lose face. So you're asking somebody if they know this address, and they say, oh yeah, it's down here, and you start going down there. You ask another person because you walked for 500 meters or something, and you're like, I don't think this is right. You ask the next person, and he tells you got to go back the other way. And so one of the things that I always do if I'm lost, which usually isn't too often, but if I am lost, I will find a police officer, because they're going to help you. And you can approach them without feeling nervous, because they're not armed. They're not going to, like, pull a gun on you and shoot you. As for in the United States, I don't approach police officers and wouldn't approach police officers. Unless my life is in danger, I really wouldn't do that. And so a lot of people will talk about, well, you don't have freedoms in China because you don't have the right to own a gun. And I'm like, well, do you truly need that? And a lot of people argue about the Second Amendment, and I get the argument that you do need to have weapons in case your government becomes tyrannical and yada yada yada. I get that. But there is this balance, I guess. And the balance is, how much freedom do you want versus how much safety do you want? Now, some people say we want all the freedoms, right? A lot of people. I'm crossing another road. There's too many busy roads here. Some people say we want all the freedoms, and therefore it's our responsibility to provide our own safety and protection, and that can even be against the government. Now, other people in other countries, and actually most countries, say no, what we want is safety within our schools, within our grocery stores, within our hospitals, within our banks. We don't want anybody who has a gun to be able to run in and start shooting people. So we will limit the gun ownership. Whereas in the United States, they say no. So it's amount of chaos. And the more freedoms you have, the more chaos you have, in my opinion. So the system, if you allow for more freedoms, then you have more chaos. And in the United States, they want full freedoms, which lead to a fully chaotic society. And you can see that in almost every environment. And so yeah, like in the United States, I feel the system is very chaotic, and that's what they want. Extreme freedoms allow for each individual, again, going back, if you were watching my homeless video when I was out walking on the street, this individual aspect is the society doesn't take care of things like security and safety. It's up to the individual, and you have a gun, and you should even attack your government if it's too, tyrannical, so to say. As for here, nobody's armed. Even the police are very rarely armed. That means that if there's an incident, they're more likely to show up and ask what's going on, ask questions first, and then subdue or prosecute somebody later, versus showing up and saying, let's control the situation with extreme force, and then we'll figure it out afterwards once everybody is, dead to some extent. I mean, in some situations, yes, and of course that's not really fair. But you can also see, like, in a video where I was talking about the United States, about how I view the United States after living here for many years, that the incarceration rate in the United States is higher than here in China, even though China has a population that is like three or four times the amount of the United States. And so you would say, well, are more people committing crimes in the United States, or the police just arresting more people? Like, what is going on? And again, more freedoms means more chaos, which means essentially more crime. I've been watching a lot of videos recently on Twitter, which I shouldn't be on Twitter. It's a garbage platform. Anyways, I've been seeing a lot of videos where these people are like running into shops and like stealing everything, and you're like, what is going on? Like, what is honestly going on? Because there's just, 30 people run into Walmart and just start stealing everything, and you're like, one, why isn't that being stopped? Two, why isn't that being prosecuted? And three, why do they think that that is okay? Like, we all live in this society, and if we want things to function, we all have to do our part. And it seems like in the United States, it's just very much every man for himself at this point. You have to protect yourself, and you can see it in the comments. People are saying, oh, I will never agree with you on the guns. I got to protect my family. And you're like, well, if society valued the same things, you wouldn't need to be so worried about your own protection. Like, you can't protect yourself from everything all the time. So you want to live in a society that shuns crime, that helps protect the society, so to say, that has consequences for actions. And here, I've lived here successfully for 12 years, never had a run-in with the police again, other than the one time that I said about at the beginning of this video, and that was an intended, expected run-in. So I have to say, like, this is a country that most people respect the law, and most people are willing to abide by the law. Now, is it a police state? Yeah, to some extent. There are police on every corner, and there are cameras and facial recognition software everywhere. But is there any more a police state than the United States? And I would say no. And the difference is, and the big difference is, it might be a police state. They might track you here. They might track your payments. They might have a social credit system. They might have, police and cameras and everything. And they might track you, which, I mean, they do. But I've never felt threatened living here. So the big difference is, in the United States, they track you. They track your credit cards. They have police on every corner. And they have cameras on every corner. I saw a report, years ago saying that you're filmed like 20 times a day through CCTV cameras in the United States. So it's really no different. They're also rolling out facial recognition software. They were saying in the January 6th incident at the Capitol, they were using facial recognition software on the crowd to try and find known criminals, or just to find people, and using that against social media to try and match people who are there to their social media platforms so that they could then track them down and arrest them. So all the tactics that China's using to track and control its people, the United States is either currently using or implementing. But the big difference is the guns. There's not people being shot in China every day. I mean, I was just seeing recently that there's been more mass shootings in the United States than there has been days this year. And so, and those are the ones that are like mass shootings. Those aren't even the ones that are just individual incidences where somebody has committed a crime using a gun, or assaulted somebody like their family member or somebody they know. Those are the ones that are actually being reported as so-called mass shootings. And so the big difference is, sure, I'm being tracked here, but if I was in the United States, I'd be tracked. The difference is, here, nobody's threatening me or my life. And again, it all comes back to the type of citizens. If you are on a law, like a law-abiding citizen, then you don't really have much to fear. You know, everybody thinks like the Chinese are just being rounded up and taken off to camps and beaten and it's all terrible. And it's like, no, if you commit crimes, things will happen. Just like in every country, you commit crimes, you should have to deal with the consequences of those crimes. But here, I feel more at ease, and I even feel comfortable approaching the police here, which is a big difference than, say, in the United States. Now, this is obviously coming from a foreigner who has a very different perspective than a local Chinese or a minority group or any other, situation. So it's hard to say if my experience is the true experience, because of course I am a foreigner and I do recognize that. But that does say something a lot about the culture. Like, it says a lot about the culture in my mind, because in the United States, foreigners are mistreated. If you're a Mexican, or you're someone from South America, or if you're African from like Africa, even if you're Chinese, I mean, the hate against the Chinese over the last few years has gotten really out of control. So the way foreigners are treated can tell you a lot about the society. And here in China, foreigners are respected and taken care of. Anytime I've ever had an issue, like even in that incident where I was having like a run-in with the police, so to say, some of the people around were kind of curious and like wondering if I needed help. Of course, when they realized it was the police, they're like, okay, maybe we'll stay out of it. But the first reaction was like, oh, does this guy need help? Can we help him? And I get that all the time whenever I go out. And so I can only talk about my experience here as a foreigner living here. And it's been good. I've never had any issues with the law. I've never had any issues with the people. And, I've seen street sellers get shooed away by the police, and I've seen incidences where the police are arresting somebody. But, of course, I'm not out on the streets looking for problems, but I've had more incidences in the United States than I've had here in Beijing. And most of my adult life has been split between China and the United States. So whenever somebody says there's this terrible police state, I always have to say, well, where have you actually been? Have you actually been in China? Have you lived here long enough to make that assessment? And of course, there are incidences, like in every country, but I feel pretty safe here. And that's the bottom line, is what do you want? Do you want to live in a safe society, or do you want to live in a totally free society? Because total freedom is anarchy, and it feels like when you see the news, America's going farther and farther towards the anarchy, whereas China seems to be a pretty stable society and a pretty safe. And I would say for most everyday occurrences, if you're not doing anything crazy, it's a pretty safe country. What do you guys think? And where do you stand on the spectrum? Because I think it's the spectrum between full chaos, full anarchy, full freedom, and police state. And I think the United States is weirdly on both ends. It's very militarized, and it's very much a police state. But at the same time, you have a whole lot of freedoms which create chaos, because when you try to exert those freedoms, you end up triggering the police state that comes at you with full force. As for China, it's definitely a police state, but it's not an intrusive in your everyday life. Like, sure, there's cameras. I'm sure lots of cameras have already spotted me. I'm sure people even in the video will be like, oh, I saw 20,000 cameras when you're walking around. I'll be like, yeah, of course, there's cameras on every corner. Even the police, I've showed you quite a few police. I'm not down near the area by the Forbidden City anymore, which means the police have actually thinned out. If you've been watching in the video, you probably haven't seen nearly as many police cars or just police. So that's kind of where we stand. That's kind of where I stand. This video has already gone on long enough. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? What would you rather have? A safe society or a free society? What is more valuable? Because me personally, I want a safe and free society, but it's a fine line, because how much freedom should you have, and what are the consequences of too much freedom, and what are the consequences of too much control? Let me know in the comments below, and we will I'll catch you in the next video.